Here's our interview with Scott Shay. What do you believe is the most compelling evidence or argument for religion over atheism?
Well, so let me say this. First of all, I'm going to just start with what is the most compelling evidence that there's a creator, a maker, an almighty, that the universe didn't just come into being. And here I also take basically science to prove it, because one of the things that was one of the many casualties of the 20th century was science in a certain kind of way, which has become scientism, where science says certain things, but it can't go beyond that. It can, and that's where we've got into scientism, where people say the science says. Well, science has its limits, and and I think everyone agrees that the likelihood of us living in a universe with either famously six constants, in other words, numbers that have no relation to any other field, force of nature, they're required for our existence. They're required, forget about our existence, they're required that there could be suns. I'm talking about the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the force that's essentially dark matter that keeps things expanding, the force of gravitation. They're just constants. And some of them, if they were very little, very, very small differences, the universe wouldn't be able to be here in the way that we know it, or hydrogen wouldn't have been able to form anything but, say, helium and deuterium, et cetera. I don't want to go into too much detail, but the way that scientists posit that this was all, this hugely unlikely scenario of the universe existing as it does, is that we're one of many universes in the multiverse, right? You've heard the multiverse. Mm-hmm. So that there are an infinite number of universes. We happen to be on the one universe that is fit for our sort of carbon-based life. Now, if you believe that, it's okay, but it's no more than a belief, like believing in God, because there's no proof of the multiverse. There's no proof that there's any universe behind us. I mean, ask any scientist, there's no proof. There's math, okay? But if you take the percentages of all of these constants being random numbers and we being in this correct universe to have life so that you and I can be talking, it's one in many, divided by many, many, many trillions of trillions. Now, that doesn't mean that we are just so lucky that we are the one divided by trillions, but it's unlikely. And it begs for another explanation. And science doesn't offer us one.
Yeah, I mean, to put it simply, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang, and science hasn't explained that. I know some people don't necessarily buy into the Big Bang, but most scientists, that's the best explanation, right? Is Big Bang. But to put it simply, what happened prior to the Big Bang? So scientists can't explain that, and therein lies the possibility of a creator, right? Supernatural creator, whatever we want to call it, but to me, that still begs the question, okay, but so there's a creator. Is this a creator in the type that we talk about in religions of our world, which is this God who's paying attention, who's judging us, who cares how we live our life, that sends a big flood in, that has heaven and hell? I mean, that's what I'm talking about when I talk. For me, that's atheism versus non-atheism. Because to say that, well, gee, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang, and gee, maybe that was a creator. Okay, I could buy that. But what I'm not buying is a God where humans are any more special than any other animal. In fact, let's stick with that one right there. I'm just curious your thoughts on that, because if you're a believer in the Bible, humans are special compared to any other living being on Earth. I don't see that. I believe in evolution. And if you see evolution, everybody came from a single cell amoeba in the ocean, and we evolved into various different life forms, and humans happen to be one of the life forms.
Yeah. So first of all, to people who I believe that evolution is definitely a process. I don't think there's any doubt about that to accept it on its own terms. But no one is actually a Darwinist anymore, even among scientists. Everybody is a neo-Darwinist. In other words, Darwin first came up with the idea of natural selection. And that works. And we can see that for species. We, by the way, have no evidence and no understanding for what happened pre the Cambrian explosion. Because if you go back, a few 100 million years ago to the Cambrian era, at that point, every major species was represented. There's not any substantially new phylum. There aren't any really new phylums that have arisen. So you went from an era of, say, 3 billion years to a period of a few 100 million years where where during those billions of years, we went from cells that didn't process oxygen the same way to cells that process oxygen the same way we do, to maybe some multi-celled beings, some multi-celled animals, not bigger than the earphones or not bigger than, the tips of our fingers. And then all of a sudden we have everything that became the mammoths and became fish and became primates and became reptiles, et cetera, et cetera. So if you do the math, evolution could conceivably work. But when you consider the number of proteins the number of amino acids in a protein, and you make a heroic assumption that every generation there is a major mutation, and then you figure out, and you have to do this, most mutations result in the death or sterility, most of the time death or sterility of the next generation. Very few mutations are positive, very, very few. And if you just do the math, evolution to human beings could work, but it would still take another 8 or 10 billion years. So something happened.
What about, sorry to interrupt, because you're on a good thread here, but would you say the same thing about apes? That apes would not have evolved by now?
Precambrian, oh, for sure, there would be no apes right now. If you just follow the math of how long, and I'm not taking any heroic assumptions. I'm actually being very kind to evolution. One mutation per generation that ends up being effective. Going from, if you have enough time, if you have the entire time in the universe, then ultimately you could get to people, but that won't happen before our sun explodes and becomes and engulfs us.
So what if we go with your theory here, then what does that tell us? Because on the one hand, you're saying, yes, evolution's taking place, but not at a speed that could explain humans.
So my explanation is that some being wanted humans. Now, whether that being wants it because they enjoy watching us interact, care, I can't go to the point where I can prove. There's no proof.
But to be clear, that entity wants humans and it wants apes and it wants a lot of other animals that you're saying would not have evolved to this point yet.
Sure, 100%. Okay. Why not? Why not? I mean,
so what would have evolved? What could have evolved to this point based on your theory? As we look out at living creatures,
again, it's the math. There would be small, many multi-celled creatures that would probably be way less than the size of, again, our fingers.
Thank you again to Scott Shay. You can check out either of his books, In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, or his new book, Conspiracy U, wherever you buy books. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.